Have you ever witnessed a moment so impossible, so raw, that the entire world seemed to hold its breath? Picture this. A man who has never begged for anything in his life. Gavino Gallo, the king of Chicago's North Side, a man whose name makes politicians lower their eyes and rivals cross the street. He doesn't grieve. He doesn't bend. He has spent an entire year hunting the people who turned his wife into ash and silence. But tonight, he isn't hunting. Tonight, he brought his sons to dinner. Bruto and Fabio Gallo, for years old, dressed in white suits like tiny princes, and completely, devastatingly mute, ever since the night a car bomb swallowed their mother whole and left their father with nothing but two boys who had forgotten how to speak. Then, in the middle of a crowded restaurant, the noise dies. Both boys go rigid in their seats. Two small fingers rise and point directly at the waitress refilling the table beside theirs. And for the first time in 365 days, Gavino Gallo hears his sons' voices. They don't say Papa. They say Mama. This isn't a coincidence. It isn't a miracle. It is a buried secret clawing its way up through the floorboards, and it is about to burn Chicago to the ground. Stay until the end. Because the truth about who that waitress really is will destroy everything Gavino thought he knew about loyalty, loss, and the people sleeping inside his own walls. The Ivory Vault did not look like a place where ordinary women worked. Its ceilings were coffered and gilded. Its booths were upholstered in oxblood leather. Politicians brokered favors over the lamb chops. CEOs signed the kinds of agreements that never appeared in any boardroom. Even the silverware had a weight to it, the deliberate, heavy kind that reminded you, with every lift of the fork, that you were somewhere that mattered. For Cyrilla Pisani, it was just another Friday night of aching arches and memorized specials. Cyrilla. Table 7 is still waiting on their Barolo. Her manager, a compact, perpetually damp man named Mr. Ferraro, appeared at her elbow like an anxious ghost. And, for the love of God, stop staring at the door. I wasn't staring, she said. She was, a little. She didn't know why. She never knew why. There was just something that happened to her sometimes, a low, sourceless pull in her chest, like a compass needle swinging toward a north she couldn't name. Her therapist called it an anxiety response. Cyrilla called it the feeling that she was always slightly late to something she couldn't remember scheduling. She grabbed the Barolo and moved. She had been working doubles at the Ivory Vault for 8 months, ever since she'd woken up in a hospital in Milwaukee with no ID, no memory past a rolling wall of smoke and heat, and a nurse pressing a warm cloth to a scar above her left ear. The doctors had a word for what she had. Retrograde amnesia. Cyrilla had a simpler word for it: nothing. There was simply nothing before the white ceiling of that hospital room. No family. No history. No face she recognized as home. What she had was this: 2 capable hands, a talent for carrying 4 plates at once, and a name the hospital social worker had helped her choose from a list. Cyrilla. It meant nothing. That felt right. She had built a quiet life from that nothing. A studio apartment in Wicker Park. A library card. A coworker named Danny who made her laugh on the bad nights. It wasn't a life she could remember choosing, but it was hers, and it was small enough to be safe. She had learned, without knowing why she'd learned it, that small was safer than large. That visible was more dangerous than invisible. That you kept your head down, your apron straight, and you did not let yourself wonder too hard about the phantom weight on your left ring finger, the ghost of a band that wasn't there. Table 7. Barolo. Move. The atmosphere changed before she understood why. It started at the front of the house, a subtle compression, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The low, warm murmur of dinner conversation thinned. Cyrilla was halfway to table 7 when she noticed that Mr. Ferraro had gone completely, uncharacteristically still near the host's stand, his face the particular shade of pale that suggested the evening had just become significantly above his pay grade. She looked toward the entrance. The man who walked in did not so much enter a room as occupy it. He was broad-shouldered and dark-suited, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved with a grudge, and tattoos climbing the backs of both hands, intricate, territorial, the kind of ink that meant something specific to specific people. He moved through the foyer without looking at the maitre d', without acknowledging the low current of recognition that rippled through every table he passed. He didn't need to. The room had already rearranged itself around him the way water parts for stone. Cyrilla knew his name the way she knew weather was coming, not from memory, but from the atmosphere itself. Gavino Gallo, King of the North Side. The most dangerous man in Chicago. A widower, they said, who had spent the last 12 months dismantling the city's underworld piece by piece, looking for the people responsible for his wife's death and finding nothing but ash. Cyrilla had heard his name at the bar, at the coffee station, in the hushed, thrilled tones that people reserved for disasters and royalty. She had nodded and moved on and filed it under not your business. She was a waitress. He was a myth. Their worlds did not intersect. But then she saw what walked beside him. 2 small boys in white suits, seated now at the corner booth, the one reserved for guests whose security teams needed sight lines to every exit. They were identical, dark curling hair, wide brown eyes, round-cheeked and solemn in the way that very young children are solemn when they have absorbed more silence than they should. They sat with a preternatural stillness, not fidgeting, not reaching for the bread basket, just present in the way of children who have learned that the world can be loud and terrible without warning. Cyrilla. Mr. Ferraro materialized at her shoulder again, his voice dropping to something barely above a breath. VIP corner. You're taking it. Do not make conversation. Do not linger. Pour, smile, disappear. Are we clear? Crystal, she said. She picked up the crystal pitcher from the service station, cold and heavy against her palm, and walked toward the corner booth. She was 3 tables away when the smaller of the 2 boys turned his head. He was looking directly at her. Cyrilla felt the compass needle in her chest swing hard, so hard it nearly buckled her step. She kept walking. Small. Invisible. Professional. She was 2 tables away when the second boy turned. And then both of them were looking at her with an expression she had no language for. Not curiosity. Not recognition in any ordinary sense. Something older than that. Something that lived below thought, in the place where the body keeps its most essential knowledge. Their father had his back to her. He was speaking in a low voice to the man on his right, his tattooed hand flat on the white tablecloth, his profile sharp and exhausted and iron-hard. Cyrilla reached the table. She reached for the nearest glass. And then Bruto Gallo, for years old, silent for 12 months, a child who had not spoken a single word since the night the world ended, dropped his toy, raised his small finger, pointed it directly at Cyrilla's face, and said, in a voice like the first clear note after a year of static, "Mama." His brother's voice followed, an echo, a confirmation, a verdict, "Mama." The crystal pitcher hit the tablecloth. Gavino Gallo went completely still. Then, very slowly, he turned around. The boys had not spoken in 365 days. Gavino had tried everything: specialists, therapists, a child psychologist who charged $400 an hour and said words like trauma response and timeline of recovery. While Gavino sat in an office chair and quietly contemplated the structural integrity of the man's jawbone. His sons had not spoken. Until now. Until her. He looked at the waitress, young, pale, her hair pulled back in a simple knot, her face frozen in an expression he could not immediately classify, and felt something cold and enormous move through the center of his chest. He knew that face. He had buried that face. "What," Gavino Gallo said, very quietly, "is your name?" The alarm went off at 5:15, same as always. Cyrilla lay still for a moment in the gray morning dark of her Wicker Park studio, listening to the radiator knock and the L train groan past 2 blocks east, and did the small, private inventory she performed every morning before her feet touched the floor. Name: Cyrilla Pisani. Age: approximate 26, give or take what the hospital had estimated from her bone density and the unhelpful blankness where a birth certificate should have been. Occupation: waitress, the Ivory Vault, 6 nights a week plus Sunday brunch when Danny called in sick, which was often. Everything accounted for. Everything exactly where she'd left it. She got up. The apartment was the kind of small that stopped feeling small once you stopped fighting it. A bed, a kitchen counter, a window that looked onto a fire escape where she kept a pot of basil she talked to on bad nights. The walls were bare except for a museum postcard of Lake Michigan in winter, gray water, gray sky, a horizon that looked like it had given up trying to be 2 different things. She made coffee. She did not light the gas burner to make eggs. She never lit the gas burner. This was the one rule she kept without fully understanding it, the one place where her body simply refused and her mind didn't argue. She'd tried once, in the first weeks after Milwaukee. Had stood with the long-reach lighter in her hand, had clicked the flame to life, and felt something unspool in her chest so fast and so violently that she'd sat down on the kitchen floor and pressed her back against the cabinet until her breathing evened out. After that, she bought an electric kettle and a microwave and made her peace with it. Some things you didn't push. She ate cold yogurt standing at the counter and looked at her left hand. The feeling was there again. It was always there, a low, insistent pressure on her ring finger, warm and specific, like a hand holding hers that she couldn't turn to see. She had asked her therapist about it. Somatic memory, the woman had said kindly. Your body remembers things your mind hasn't yet found language for. Cyrilla had nodded. She had not told the therapist how real it felt. How some mornings it didn't feel like a ghost at all. It felt like a promise someone else had made on her behalf, to a life she couldn't find her way back to. She rinsed her mug, pulled on her uniform, and went to work. She tried to leave twice. The first time, she set the pitcher down on the table with both hands, a deliberate, grounding act, and said, quietly and professionally, that she needed to attend to another table. Gavino Gallo looked at her the way a wall looks at a person who has just walked into it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He simply said, sit down, in a tone that had clearly never once in its life been disobeyed, and something in Cyrilla's legs made a unilateral decision to comply before her mind had finished forming the objection. The second time, she stood up anyway. His hand closed gently, which was somehow worse, around her wrist. I don't know you, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. I don't know your children. I'm sorry for whatever you're going through, but I am a waitress, and I have other tables, and I need you to let go of my arm. Gavino Gallo looked at her for a long moment. Up close, the exhaustion in his face was more pronounced, carved deep around his eyes, settled into the brackets around his mouth. He looked like a man who had been running on fury alone for a year and had just, without warning, run out of road. My sons haven't spoken, he said, since the night their mother died. Not one word. 12 months of nothing. He paused. They just said mama. To you. A stranger. Cyrilla said nothing. You're not a stranger to them. I have amnesia, she said flatly. I woke up in a hospital 14 months ago with no memory and no identity. Whatever your sons think they recognize, they're mistaken. Children make mistakes. Something moved across his face, a fracture, quickly controlled. Bianca had a scar, he said. 2 centimeters. Just above her left ear. The room went very quiet inside Cyrilla's skull. She did not touch her hair. She refused to touch her hair. But her hand moved anyway, 2 fingers rising almost involuntarily to the spot above her left ear, finding the ridge of raised skin she had long since stopped thinking about. Gavino watched her do it. I'm not asking you to remember me, he said quietly. I'm asking you to take a test. One test. Tonight. His eyes moved briefly, helplessly, to his sons, who were still watching her with those wide, certain, heartbreaking eyes. Let the science tell us what my boys already know. They send a car. Of course they send a car. Cyrilla sat in the back of a black SUV that smelled of leather and cedar and something else, something underneath, quieter, that her brain kept reaching toward and failing to name, and watched Chicago slide past the tinted windows. Gavino rode in a separate vehicle with the boys. She understood this was deliberate. He was giving her space so she wouldn't feel like a prisoner while ensuring, with the two broad-shouldered men in the front seats, that she arrived. The Gallo estate sat behind iron gates on the northern edge of Lincoln Park, set back from the street behind a line of oaks so old and dense they swallowed the building whole at first glance. When the gates opened and the car curved up the drive, Cyrilla felt the compass needle in her chest swing again, harder this time, and longer, like it was trying to lock onto something just beyond the tree line. She told herself it was anxiety. They put her in a guest room. A doctor came, quiet and efficient, and swabbed the inside of her cheek without ceremony. 48 hours, he said. Possibly less, given the urgency Mr. Gallo had communicated. Cyrilla thanked him in the voice she used for difficult customers and sat on the edge of the guest bed until she heard the house go still. Then she couldn't sleep. She told herself she was simply restless, new environment, bad lighting, the specific unease of being inside a stranger's house under extraordinary circumstances. She believed this for approximately 40 minutes before she got up, opened the bedroom door, and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark. She didn't look for a light switch. She didn't need one. Her feet moved with a confidence her mind refused to authorize, left at the top of the stairs, past the third door, down the corridor where the floorboards ran east to west, and the last one before the landing creaked on the right side, so you stepped left. She knew this. She didn't know how she knew this. She kept walking. She stopped outside a door at the end of the hall. Her hand found the handle. Turned it. Pushed it open 6 inches, the exact 6 inches required before the hinges caught and protested. Inside, 2 small boys slept in twin beds pushed close together, their dark curls spread across white pillows, their breathing slow and synchronized. Cyrilla stood in the doorway for a long time. Her chest did not swing or pull or ache with its usual sourceless hunger. For the first time in 14 months, the compass was completely, devastatingly still. It had found its north. She reached up and touched the scar above her ear, and for one terrible, luminous second, she almost remembered something, a lullaby, half a bar, in a voice that sounded like her own. Then it was gone. She pulled the door closed to exactly 6 inches and stood in the dark hallway, pressing her back against the wall, and tried very hard not to come apart. Silvio Ardone heard about the waitress before midnight. He had people everywhere, in the kitchen at the Ivory Vault, in the security detail, in the pool of drivers who ferried information along with passengers and considered both equally tradable. By the time Gavino's convoy had cleared the estate gates, Silvio was already sitting in the back room of a bar he didn't own on paper. With a glass of scotch he hadn't touched and a phone he was turning slowly over in his hands like a man working a set of worry beads. The waitress had touched the scar. That was the detail that mattered. His source had been close enough to see it, the involuntary reach, 2 fingers to the spot above the left ear, the half-second of recognition moving across her face before she locked it down. Silvio had spent 14 months building a version of events in which Bianca Gallo was ash and silence and a closed case. He had attended the memorial. He had stood at Gavino's left shoulder, the trusted underboss, the grieving second-in-command, and he had kept his face a careful composition of sorrow while internally he'd been cataloging assets, restructuring loyalties, drawing the quiet architecture of everything the Gallo name would become once the grief calcified into something he could manage. He had been patient. He was very good at patient. He picked up the phone. The man he called was not a man who appeared in any organizational chart. He existed in the negative space of the Gallo Empire, the gap between what Gavino ordered and what Silvio needed. He answered on the second ring because he understood that a second ring communicated competence without appearing eager. "There's a woman at the estate," Silvio said. "Guest room, East Wing. I need to know everything about her by morning, who she's spoken to, what name she's been using, whether she's filed anything with anyone in the last 14 months. He paused, weighing the next part. "And I need you to determine, quietly, what access looks like." A silence on the other end. Then, access meaning what exactly? Silvio looked at his untouched scotch. Thought about Gavino's face the first time he'd described the car bombing, the way the man's grief had been so total, so annihilating, that it had been almost beautiful to witness. "Meaning the mistake needs finishing," he said. "Before the DNA does." She didn't mean to go to the kitchen. She had woken at 6, same as always, the alarm on her phone cutting through a dream she couldn't hold, something warm and loud, the smell of garlic and butter and small hands pulling at her sleeve. She lay still for a moment doing her inventory. Name, occupation, location. The last item was new and unsettling, but she filed it and got up and told herself she would simply find coffee, drink it, and wait with appropriate composure for the results of a test that would almost certainly confirm she was a stranger who happened to share a blood type with a dead woman. The kitchen was enormous, professional grade, marble countered, the kind of space that implied a full staff. At 6 in the morning it was empty and blue-lit and smelled faintly of the rosemary bundles hanging above the window. Cyrilla found the coffee without looking for it, her hand going directly to the third cabinet left of the range, reaching to the back of the second shelf. She stopped with a bag of grounds in her hand. She had not opened any cabinets. She had simply reached, the way you reach for something that has always been exactly there. She made the coffee. She told herself it was a coincidence. She drank the first cup standing at the counter, watching the garden go from black to gray to pale winter green, and she was fine. She was completely fine. She was going to drink this coffee and return to the guest room and wait. Then she heard them. Bruto and Fabio came down the back stairs in their pajamas, dark curls disordered, faces still creased with sleep, led by a nanny who looked startled to find the kitchen occupied. The boys stopped when they saw Cyrilla. They didn't speak. They crossed the kitchen floor in their sock feet and pressed themselves against either side of her legs with the simple, absolute confidence of children who have never once doubted their welcome. The nanny said something about breakfast. Cyrilla wasn't listening. Her hands were already moving. Semolina. The good olive oil, second shelf, beside the sea salt. Pecorino from the drawer below, the flat one that stuck unless you lifted and pulled simultaneously. Brown butter. Fresh sage for leaves, bruised not torn. She had never made this recipe as Cyrilla Pisani. She had made it 100 times as someone else. Her hands knew every step. The boys climbed onto their stools and watched her with patient, luminous certainty, and Cyrilla stood at the stove she had never stood at before and cooked a meal she had never learned and felt the neat, careful architecture of her constructed life begin to crack straight down the middle. The DNA results came back in 31 hours. Gavino didn't lead with them. He found her in the garden after lunch, where she had taken to sitting on the stone bench beside the dormant rose beds, because it was the one place on the estate where her body didn't do anything unnerving, didn't navigate, didn't reach, didn't cook a dead woman's recipes from muscle memory. He sat down beside her without asking, which she had already identified as a fundamental characteristic of the man, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The garden was cold and white-skied and very quiet. "You already know what the results say," she said finally. "Yes." She looked at her hands. The phantom weight on her left finger was stronger today, almost insistent, like a tide coming in. Knowing and understanding aren't the same thing. I need you to know that I don't remember being her. I'm not hiding it. There's nothing to uncover. There is genuinely nothing there. "I know," he said. And then, quietly, I watched you make the boys' Thursday meal this morning. Bianca was the only person who knew that recipe. Her grandmother gave it to her in a letter that no longer exists. He paused. She never wrote it down. Cyrilla said nothing. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small evidence bag, the kind, she noted distantly, that suggested it had passed through official hands before his. Inside was a silver locket on a fine chain, the surface heat-darkened and scratched, one edge slightly warped. They recovered it from the site, he said. 14 months ago. I've kept it. She took the bag, turned it over. Through the plastic she could see the locket's face, a small engraved lily, simple, worn smooth at the center from handling. Her thumb found the lower left corner of the locket's edge. Pressed inward, then slid right, a motion so specific and so automatic that she had performed it completely before she understood she was performing it. A second panel, invisible in the seam, released with a soft click. Inside was a photograph no larger than a thumbnail. 2 faces. Hers. His. Younger, unguarded, laughing at something outside the frame. Cyrilla stared at it for a long time. There's a second compartment, she heard herself say. Her nail found the groove beneath the photo and pressed. Another release. A folded slip of paper, tissue thin, 4 numbers in her own handwriting. She looked up at Gavino. His jaw was tight, his eyes very still. I never told anyone about that compartment, he said. Not even my jeweler. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere inside the house, the boys were laughing at something. Cyrilla closed her fingers around the locket and felt, for the first time, not the ghost of something lost, but the first faint outline of something that had been waiting. She heard the glass break at 2 in the morning. Not the sharp, accidental crack of something dropped, the deliberate, muffled pop of a windowpane being scored and pressed inward by someone who had done it before. Cyrilla was awake before the sound finished, sitting upright in the guest bed with her heart already at a full sprint, and in the 3 seconds it took her to cross the room and press her back against the wall beside the door. Something fundamental shifted in the way she was occupying her own body. She didn't think about the boys. She was simply already moving toward them. The hallway was dark. She took it the way she had taken it 3 nights ago, left at the stairs, past the 3rd door, wait to the left on the last floorboard. Behind her she could hear movement on the east staircase, 2 sets of footsteps, unhurried in the way of men who believed the house was asleep. She had perhaps 40 seconds. She reached the boys' door, opened it to 6 inches, slipped inside. Bruto was already awake, sitting up, his eyes finding her in the dark with an immediacy that suggested he had been waiting. She crossed to him first, one hand gentle on his chest, pressing him back down, a single finger to her lips. Then Fabio, the same gesture, the same silent instruction. Both boys obeyed without sound. This, too, she understood distantly, was something she had taught them. She positioned herself between the door and the beds and picked up the fireplace poker from the stand beside the hearth, her hand finding it without looking, her grip settling into a hold that was neither amateur nor improvised. The door opened. What happened next took 11 seconds. She knew this because she counted, the way she apparently counted, the way Bianca Gallo had always counted, calmly, tactically, with the specific clarity that arrives when the body finally stops waiting for the mind to catch up and simply handles the thing itself. The first man went down hard. The second made it 2 steps into the room. Neither made a sound that woke the boys. When Gavino came through the door 40 seconds later with 3 of his men and a weapon drawn, he found Cyrilla standing over 2 incapacitated intruders with the poker loose in her hand and her breathing almost entirely even. She turned and looked at him. And in that moment, standing in the dark between his sons and the door, she felt the last of the fog simply release. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough. A name rising through still water. A face in a mirror finally focusing. Your underboss, she said, Her voice someone else's and entirely her own. It was Silvio. I remember the garage. I remember his voice. She paused. I remember everything. Gavino Gallo crossed the room in 4 steps and said nothing at all, which was, she was remembering now, exactly what he always did when words were insufficient. Bianca Gallo had always understood something that most people in her world forgot. Power announced itself. It walked through the front door with a security detail and a reputation and a room that rearranged itself accordingly. Everyone watched the powerful man. Everyone tracked his hands, his eyes, his mood. This was useful occasionally. But it was also, in the right circumstances, a liability, because while every eye in the room followed the man everyone feared, nobody watched the waitress refilling the water glass at his elbow. Nobody ever watched the waitress. She explained this to Gavino on a Tuesday evening, standing in the kitchen of the estate with the locket around her neck and 14 months of constructed life slowly integrating itself into the larger architecture of who she actually was. He listened with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and the expression he wore when he disagreed with something but recognized it was correct. "You're not going back there," he said. "I already called Mr. Ferraro," she said. "I told him I'd been dealing with a family emergency." He was so relieved he didn't ask a single question. She paused. "Silvio books the private dining room at the Ivory Vault every 3rd Wednesday. Tomorrow is the 3rd Wednesday. Bianca. He tried to kill me in my sleep," she said. "In front of our sons." Her voice was even. "I'm not asking." She went back on Wednesday in her uniform, apron straight, hair up, the silver locket tucked beneath her collar where it rested warm against her sternum. Danny hugged her at the service station and asked no difficult questions. The kitchen smelled of reduction sauces and controlled chaos. The dining room filled with its usual population of careful men and careful conversations. Cyrilla moved through it all exactly as she had for 8 months, invisible, efficient, present without registering. She refilled glasses. She cleared plates. She smiled the practiced, forgettable smile of a woman whose name nobody retained past the moment she left the table. At 8:47, Silvio Ardone arrived. He didn't look at the waitstaff. He never looked at the waitstaff. He settled into the private dining room with the comfortable authority of a man who believed his loose ends were fully tied, accepted the menu from the maitre d', and did not notice the woman who set his water glass down at precisely the moment his phone received an anonymous message containing 4 numbers, the combination from the hidden compartment of a locket he believed had burned. His face, when he read it, told her everything she needed for what came next. She picked up her tray. She walked back to the service station. Outside the restaurant's service entrance, 3 of Gavino's men were waiting in a car that wasn't registered to anyone. She texted one word, confirmed. Then she untied her apron, folded it neatly over the service counter, and did not look back. Silvio was handled by Thursday. Bianca didn't ask for the details and Gavino didn't offer them, which was its own kind of language, the shorthand of 2 people who had spent years building a shared grammar of what needed saying and what didn't. What she knew is this: it was finished. The threat that had lived in the walls of the Gallo Empire like rot behind good plaster had been cut out, and the house was clean, and her sons were safe. The rest was Gavino's accounting to make, and she trusted him to make it. What surprised her was how quickly the ordinary returned. Not her old ordinary, the 5:15 alarm, the cold yogurt, the careful smallness of Wicker Park. Something older and larger and, she was discovering, considerably louder. Bruto and Fabio had apparently been conserving 14 months of speech and had decided, collectively, that the moratorium was over. They talked through breakfast and through bath time and through the picture books. She read them each night in the room she now navigated without thinking, in the dark, by the body knowledge she had never actually lost. They called her Mama without hesitation or ceremony, the way children call things what they are. On a Saturday in early March, 3 weeks after the ivory vault served its last shift to Cyrilla Pisani, she sat with Gavino on the stone bench in the garden where the rose beds were beginning, tentatively, to show the first green suggestions of the season. The boys were on the lawn with a ball, engaged in a game that had rules only they fully understood, and which seemed to involve a great deal of falling down deliberately and finding this hilarious. Gavino's hand was warm over hers. His thumb moved once across her ring finger, where the band now sat, returned to the exact place her body had been mourning it for 14 months. She watched Bruto chase Fabio in a wide, wobbling circle and thought about the woman who had woken up in a Milwaukee hospital with nothing, no name, no history, no face she recognized as home. Who had built a small, careful life from that nothing and called it safety and believed, most days, that it was enough. She hadn't been living, she understood now. She had been waiting. Not for a man, not for a house, not for an empire or a name or a place at a table that had always been hers. She had been waiting for the specific, irreplaceable weight of 2 small bodies pressed against her legs in a kitchen at 6 in the morning, certain of their welcome. Fabio fell down, laughed, got up. Bianca Gallo held her husband's hand in the thin March sunlight and felt the compass in her chest go still and stay still, finally pointing at nothing in the distance, because everything it had ever been looking for was right here on this lawn. Falling down and getting up and laughing at the sheer ordinary miracle of it. She was found. Thank you for watching this story of memory, betrayal, and a love that survived even forgetting. If Bianca's journey kept you holding your breath until the very end, please smash that like button. It helps us create more stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. Because in this world, the people who are truly lost always find their way home. See you in the next one.